Are you feeling overwhelmed with the amount of high-quality JRPGs to play in 2024? I more or less play them for a living, and even I haven't managed to play them all, so I can't even imagine what it's like for anyone watching this video. Now, while most people see this as a good thing, I actually see it as a big problem. So in this video, we'll take a look at all the JRPGs that have already come out this year, preview what's to come in the second half of the year, and talk about why this is such a big problem. Now, for those of you that forgot, the beginning of the year was an absolute bloodbath, yet somehow they all managed to sell at least 1 million copies, so I guess it wasn't that bad, but let's take a look nonetheless. So in January on the 26th, we had Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth drop, but then less than a week later, we had Granblue Blue Fantasy Relink release on February 1st, and the very next day, we had Persona 3 Reload drop. Now, to put this in perspective, the average to beat each of these three games is about 45.5 hours, and that is being pretty generous because it says for Granblue Blue Fantasy Relink it's only 15.5 hours, but I easily put in like 40 to 50, and I'm sure the same could be said about the other two games. Now, the thing that's really crazy is that Like a Dragon and Persona 3 released a week apart, and it's from the same company. I mean, I feel like Sega is cannibalizing their own sales by putting two JRPGs a week apart, and I don't know about you, but I just didn't have the time to play all of these, and the one that had to get cut from me was Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. I've heard nothing but good things about it. It's one of the best reviewed games of the year, but something's got to give at some point. And even for someone like me who has a channel like this and it's kind of my job to play JRPGs, I just didn't have time for it. Not to mention the behemoth that came out at the end of the month, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So if you were to total all four of these games into our count, and again, we're being generous, assuming people aren't trying to get the platinum trophy or do more, you're looking at 183.5 hours, which is 7.5 full days. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't have 7.5 full days to just straight play games. So something's got to give. Some game has got to get cannibalized or maybe not do as well. But by some miracle, each of these games sold at least 1 million copies. I feel like Rebirth probably sold the best, around 2 to 5 million copies at this point. I'm totally not sure. But man, there were just so many JRPGs that came out around the same time. Now, thankfully, March was a lighter month with only Unicorn Overlord coming out, but still, that was a 50-hour game, and I still haven't finished that. I've gotten really far, put a lot of time into it, but haven't finished it. And then we come to the second bloodbath of the year, April. We had 4 pretty big JRPGs released within 4 days of each other. I think the one that most people played was Yuden Chronicle on the 23rd, but then on the 25th, we had both Megaton Musashi W Wired and Saga Emerald Beyond released on the same exact day, and then 1 day later, we had Sandland. Now, while I've heard that Yuden Chronicle is really good, again, that was the game that just slipped through the cracks for me, and I recently played Megaton Musashi Wired for the first time on a stream, and I was blown away at the quality of this game. I mean, it's level 5. These guys know what they're doing, but I feel like nobody played that game and nobody talked about it outside of the Kaseki Nut. So I'll leave a link to his review of the game down in the description. Please check it out because this game is incredible. And same thing with Sandland. That was a game that I just didn't have time for, but I've also heard nothing but good things. And despite the fact that I got pretty low reviews, one person whose opinion I really trust on these kind of games is Happy Console Gamer, and he did a great review. He was raving about it, saying it was awesome, especially because it has art from Akira Toriyama, who sadly passed away earlier this year. So I don't know, some of these games just got totally destroyed in sales. We just had the Steam Summer Sale and a bunch of other sales across platforms, so hopefully those helped elevate those games. But man, one of those games bombed. I don't know which one, but I know one, if not 3 of those games just didn't hit their sales expectations. Now, June was kind of a funky month. We had a bunch of re-releases, but also one really big game that I think probably ate up a lot of people's time. So we had Octopath Traveler 2 come to Xbox, as well as Octopath Traveler 1 coming to PlayStation. Kingdom Hearts finally came to Steam. We had Monster Hunter Stories get remastered, as well as Monster Hunter Stories 2 released across more platforms. And then we had the re-release of Shin Megami Tensei 5 in its vengeance form, but the game that probably was like a gravity well for people and where most people spent their time was Shadow of the Erd Tree for Elden Ring. I mean, like I said, it was cool that a lot of these games got re-released and on new platforms, but some of them just got totally destroyed, I'm sure. I have no idea which ones, but there's no way all those games sold well. Now, in July, we kind of had a different beast. We had 2 big releases for lifestyle games, and when I say lifestyle games, I mean like MMOs or live service games. And on July 2nd, we had Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail drop, which I'm sure people are going to be playing for tens, if not hundreds of hours. And then the latest Hoyoverse game, Zenless Zone Zero drop. Now, Hoyoverse does Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail, and I don't know how they're managing to have another big game like this. And you want to hear a really crazy stat? Zenless Zone Zero has already been downloaded 50 million times. That's insane. insane. And for those of you that don't know, I live in South Korea, I live in Seoul, and everywhere I go, that game is advertised on the side of taxis, on buildings, in the subway. It's absolutely everywhere. So really, it's not that surprising that it is doing so well, but still 50 million downloads when it already has 2 other big games. I don't know how people manage to juggle all these games or how the team manages to keep updating all of this. It's impressive nonetheless. All right, and that's just what's come out so far. But what about the second half of the year? What do we have to come? Let me tell you, my friends, it doesn't look any easier. So in August, it's not too bad, but I feel like there is one game that's going under a lot of people's radar that looks really cool, and that's Slime Isekai Chronicles, coming out on August 8th. So it sort of reminds me of like an old school Tales game where the combat is side view but action. I don't know, it just looks really cool. I've watched a few episodes of the anime, not totally my thing, but I know it has a big following, and I feel like this game's gonna slip through the cracks and not sell well. I haven't seen Bandai Namco talk about it a lot, and in fact, I've been talking to a lot of the PR people behind the scenes, and I asked about it, and they're like, oh yeah, that game, let me make the review form today. So even they seem like they've kind of forgotten about it, but I'm hoping that I can get a code and review that early for you guys, because I think that's going to be a game well worth your time and money. Now, the one game this year that I think has lots of breathing room, has a lot of hype behind it, and I think could do really well is Visions of Mana on August 29th. Now, the Trials of Mana remake totally revitalized this franchise a few years back. It was incredible. It's one of my favorite JRPGs of this generation, really of all time. And this one looks like it has a bigger budget, bigger scope. It just looks incredible. So I hope for the sake of just JRPGs on a whole that does well, because it's got all the time to itself. There's not any other competing JRPGs or really any other big games that I know of. I could be missing something, but I think Visions of Mana has the best chance of success. And a game coming out in September that I think also could do really well is Ray Natus. Now, that game also has a lot of breathing room. There's nothing really coming out JRPG wise in September, and there seems to be like some bubbling hype around this game because, you know, they're doing collabs with The World Ends With You, and people were getting a lot of Versus 13 vibes. And the only thing I'll warn people about this game is that it's being developed by Furyu, and they don't exactly make the best top quality games. I mean, they make hidden gems, they make some solid stuff, but don't go in expecting something insane. But if you have your expectations in check, this could be pretty decent. Now for the third bloodbath of the year, we've got October, and October 10th, we've got Fantasy Life I, again, another game from Level 5 that nobody seems to be talking about, doesn't seem to have a lot of hype behind it. And then the very next day, probably the biggest JRPG for the rest of the year is Metaphor ReFantasio, coming out October 11th. This is the game from the Persona team, brand new take on fantasy RPGs. The visual style looks absolutely wild. It's doing the Trails Through Daybreak thing where it combines action combat and turn-based combat. I think this is going to be the game that most people buy. I think it's going to sell incredibly well. Despite what's coming out before and after, most people's hype is behind this game, and I think it's going to do well regardless of what comes out around it. But later that month, we have yet again 2 JRPGs coming out on the exact same day. On October 25th, we have both Romancing Saga 2 Remake and Ys 10 Nordics. Now, I actually think Romancing Saga 2 Remake could do for the Saga series what the Trials of Mana remake did for the Mana series and totally revive it. Saga has been really niche. I mean, a core mainline entry came out earlier this year, and I feel like nobody cared. But to me, this looks incredible, and it's actually being developed by the same team who made the Trials of Mana remake. So I feel like it's in good hands. This is one of the better Saga games. When I did my big video kind of dumping on it, this was one of the better games that I really enjoyed. So to have a ground up remake, full 3D quality of life updates, I think this one could do really well. And then another series that I think has slowly grown in popularity and has a lot of momentum behind it is Ys, and Ys 10 Nordics looks incredible. It's one of my most anticipated games for the rest of the year. We've got Adel on a ship, which is never a good thing. There's going to be a ship or two being sunk through this game, but the combat looks incredible. The exploration looks incredible. I know people were a little disappointed in Ys 9 with it only being kind of confined to that one city. So now we've got a whole world to explore. We'll be sailing around on oceans, island hopping. I have faith that this will do pretty well, but again, the fact that it's so close to Metaphor and the same day as Romancing Saga 2, I don't know, I feel like it could be cannibalized, but we'll see what happens. And then in November, we've got a couple big JRPGs. We've got Mario and Luigi Brothership on November 7th, and then a few days later, we've got the long-awaited Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake on November 11th. Now, I have no idea what to make of this Mario and Luigi game. I've never played any of them. The team that had previously worked on them had to close down or at least filed for bankruptcy. So I don't know who's making this game or if it's even going to sell, but it seems like you can put anything out on Switch these days. It's going to sell like 5 to 10 million copies. Like Luigi's Mansion 3, moderately popular, but I think that sold like 15 million copies, which is like ridiculous. So for all I know, Mario and Luigi Brothership could sell like 10 million copies. I have no idea. And then we've got some games that are supposed to come out this year but don't have dates. Like, what's going on with that Suikoden 1 and 2 HD collection that was supposed to come out last year and it's been delayed, and we're like slowly approaching August and it still doesn't have a date, no update, nothing. So I don't know what's going on with that game, but that's supposed to come out this year. We've got yet another level 5 game that nobody's talking about, Deca Police. That game looks incredible, lots of production value, lots of charm. I think that game could be awesome, but I really hope level 5 actually puts some marketing behind it, or else it's also going to get left in the dust. And then the other game that I think has the potential to do really well, because people were talking about it when it was on mobile, but now that it's finally off and it's on consoles, it could do really well, and that's Fantasian Neo Dimension. This is the RPG from Final Fantasy series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi, and the music by Nobuo Uematsu, who is the longtime composer. Guys, this game is really awesome. I don't know when it's going to come out. Hopefully they give it the breathing room it needs, maybe in December. Maybe they'll even be smart with it and delay it till next year so it gets out of the way. Please play this game. It's really good. If you like Final Fantasy, if you love classic JRPGs, it's such an amazing game, and I think people will really appreciate it now that it's on console. And then one last thing I want to mention is I've seen some complaints in my comments recently about all the indie games that I've been covering lately, and the reason why is, I mean, just look at this video. I mean, the AAA JRPGs don't even have a prayer, let alone the indie games. So if I can do my small part to elevate some of these games, then I'm going to do that. I mean, if you look in the comments of those videos, it's one-person teams so grateful that just somebody is talking about their game. And these games deserve attention too. They're incredible, they're innovative, they're creative. And so I want to use my platform here to elevate those games whenever possible. And if you haven't seen it already, make sure you click this video here where I take a look at 25 upcoming awesome looking indie JRPGs that I think you're going to absolutely love.